Nolan Reyes closed the iron gate of his Lake Travis home, while Aria Collins stood on the other side in a borrowed black dress, clutching a folder that could either restore a billion-dollar empire or destroy everything they had built together. Her voice cracked as she called his name, rain soaking her hair against her cheeks, while his thumb hovered over a press release that would leave Sienna Maddox bankrupt on live television. The water pooled at her feet, mixing with the dirt beneath the gate, and for 3 seconds neither of them moved. Arya had just confessed that Sienna came to her first, begging for help not to save her company, but to protect the young assistants whose names were about to be dragged across financial news channels for a culture they never created. Have you ever watched someone beg for mercy and realized you were holding the one decision that could ruin them forever? Has anyone ever misjudged you because of how you looked, where you worked, or what they thought you could offer? Tonight, one man's choice will decide whether public humiliation is justice or cruelty. Stay with this story to the end and decide for yourself. Would you give a second chance, or would you let consequences speak for you? Hit like if respect matters more to you than money. And tell me in the comments if you believe some apologies come too late. To understand why Nolan hesitated at that gate, we have to go back to the first time a rich woman poured a drink on him like he was furniture. Nolan Reyes walked into the Midtown ballroom in a plain navy suit, already knowing he controlled the partnership everyone else was toasting. The marble floors gleamed under hanging lights that cost more than most people earned in a year, and servers in crisp white shirts moved like ghosts between clusters of designer gowns and sharp black tuxedos. No one looked at him twice. He kept his hands loose at his sides, watching the room the way he used to watch hotel lobbies back in Fresno when he was clearing tables for $8 an hour. Back then he learned that rich people never looked workers in the eye unless they needed something. Tonight proved nothing had changed. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Nolan took one and stayed near the edge of the room where the light didn't quite reach. He could hear laughter that sounded expensive, the kind that came easy when your worst problem was which vacation home to visit next. Across the ballroom, a woman in a silver dress stumbled slightly on her heel. Her folders slipped, and she caught them against her hip before they could scatter. A strand of dark hair stuck to her lip. She pushed it away with the back of her hand and kept moving, balancing her load and her shoes like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Nolan noticed her the way you notice someone working hard in a room full of people pretending not to try. Their eyes met for half a second. She looked away first, but something stayed behind in the air between them, a question neither of them knew how to ask yet. A security guard glanced at Nolan, then checked his phone, probably comparing his face to a guest list. The guard's shoulders relaxed, and he turned away. Nolan almost smiled. They thought he was a driver waiting for his boss. Have you ever been in a room where everyone assumed you didn't belong until they needed something from you? Then he saw her, Sienna Maddox, 6 feet tall in heels that could double as weapons, blonde hair pulled so tight it looked painful, and a smile that never reached her eyes. She was holding court near the bar, gesturing with a wine glass while 3 men in suits leaned in like she was telling them the secret to eternal life. Her gaze swept the room, landed on Nolan, and stopped. Her smile dropped. She started walking toward him, heels clicking sharp against the marble, and Nolan knew exactly what was about to happen. The glass hit his chest before anyone could stop her. Red wine spread across his white shirt like blood, soaking through to his skin in seconds. The cold shocked him first, then the smell, then the sound of phones tilting upward all around him to capture what happened next. Sienna's voice cut through the music. Who let the help stand around with the guests? Nolan didn't move. He kept his eyes on hers while the wine dripped off his tie and onto the marble floor in slow, heavy drops. His jaw tightened, but his hands stayed loose. He learned a long time ago that angry men who looked like him didn't get second chances in rooms like this. Behind Sienna, a man in a gray suit hurried forward. Cole something. Nolan remembered his name from the contracts. Cole's face was red and sweating as he reached for Sienna's arm. Sienna, maybe we should. Should what? She turned on him, still holding the empty glass. Should let random people wander into a private event? Should pretend we don't have standards. The servers had frozen mid-step. Security stood near the walls, hands hovering near their radios but not moving, waiting to see who this man really was before they made a choice they couldn't take back. Across the room, the woman with the folders stepped forward. Adia. Nolan didn't know her name yet, but he'd remember it. She pulled a napkin from a server's tray and held it out toward him, her hand shaking just enough that he could see it. Here, she said quietly. Her fingers brushed his when he took it. The touch was brief, but he felt the slight tremor, the kindness buried under fear of what speaking up might cost her. Sienna's bracelet flashed as her hand trembled, and for just a second Nolan saw something behind the rage, something that looked like panic, like she needed this moment to prove she still had power over something. Have you ever seen someone humiliate a stranger just to feel powerful? Did you speak up or stay silent? Nolan folded the napkin without using it. He looked at Sienna one more time, memorizing her face, then turned and walked toward the elevator. His phone was already in his hand before he reached the doors. Behind him, Cole was trying to laugh it off, saying something about misunderstandings and open bars. No one was laughing with him. The elevator doors slid open and Nolan stepped inside. He lifted his phone to his ear as the doors began to close, and his voice came out steady and cold. Pull the offer. Lock every channel. Now. The elevator dropped toward the lobby, and Nolan's reflection stared back at him in the polished metal doors, wine still dark against his chest. On the other end of the line, Marcus, his lead attorney, sucked in a breath. Nolan, if we pull now, they'll what? Nolan kept his voice low. Disrespect me again? I just gave you an order, Marcus. Execute it. The contracts are all ready. Then break them. Pay whatever the penalty is. I don't care. Nolan watched the floor numbers drop. Call the banks. Call the distribution partners. Tell them Reyes Capital is out, effective immediately, and anyone who wants to stay in business with us will follow. There was a pause, then the sound of Marcus typing fast. This is going to cost them everything. Good. Nolan ended the call. The elevator reached the ground floor, and the doors opened onto a lobby full of people who hadn't seen what just happened upstairs. They were laughing, checking their coats, making plans for after-parties that would go until dawn. Nolan walked past them and out into the night air. The city noise hit him. Cars honking, someone shouting for a taxi, music bleeding out from a bar down the street. He pulled his tie loose and started walking, not toward his car, but just away, letting his heart rate settle and his hands unclench. When he was 17 and bussing tables at a hotel restaurant in Fresno, a woman in diamonds had dumped a full glass of soda down his back because he'd brought her the wrong dessert. Her friends had laughed. His manager had made him apologize. He'd promised himself then that if he ever had power, he'd use it. Back in the ballroom, the music kept playing. The DJ didn't know yet that the screens behind the stage were about to go dark. The guests didn't know that their phones were seconds away from lighting up with alerts that would turn the whole night into something else entirely. Sienna was probably still at the bar, Cole beside her, both of them pretending the scene hadn't happened, that the phone's recording hadn't mattered. If you had the power to cost someone millions for disrespecting you, would you use it? Inside the ballroom, a board member's phone buzzed first, then another, then 5 more all at once, a wave of vibration and lights spreading through the crowd like a fire catching. The DJ's track cut mid-beat, and someone killed the lights by mistake, and in the sudden darkness, people started to understand that something had gone very, very wrong. The LED screens behind the stage flickered once, then went completely black. Sienna had just stretched her arms wide, mid-sentence in her prepared remarks about the future of beauty and the partnerships that make vision real, when the silence hit. She froze with her hands still up, smile locked in place, while 300 people pulled out their phones at the same time. The first alert came from Reuters. Breaking. Reyes Capital withdraws from Arista deal, citing cultural concerns. $1.2 billion partnership dissolved effective immediately. Cole's phone lit up on the table beside him. Then Elise Garner's. Then a dozen more across the room, blue light washing over faces that were just starting to understand. Champagne flutes stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-word. The only sound was the soft cascade of notification chimes spreading through the ballroom like dominoes falling. Sienna's arms dropped slowly to her sides. Her smile was still there, but it had gone stiff, frozen like someone had pressed pause on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be—" Her own phone buzzed on the podium. She glanced down. The color left her face. Behind her, Cole grabbed his phone with both hands, scrolling fast, his jaw working like he was chewing something bitter. "This can't be right. This isn't—" Someone checked the trading apps. "Someone tell me this isn't real." But it was real. Guest after guest refreshed their screens and watched Arista's stock price start to slide. Not crash yet, but slide like a car on ice, slow at first and then faster, and everyone in the room knew what happened when the momentum really kicked in. Elise Garner pushed through the crowd toward the stage, her dress catching on someone's chair. She stumbled, caught herself, and kept moving, panic written across every line of her face. By the time she reached Sienna, her voice was too loud, all the practice control gone. "The credit lines. Nolan called the banks. They're freezing everything until they can reassess our—" "Sienna, are you listening to me? We don't have cash flow to cover operations past next week without those lines." On stage, Cole squeezed Sienna's waist too hard, fingers digging in through the silk of her dress, holding on for control or comfort or maybe just to keep himself standing. His other hand held his phone up like he could force it to show different information if he stared long enough. Sienna's eyes swept the ballroom, scanning faces that were all turned toward screens now instead of toward her. She was looking for someone. For him. For the man she'd soaked in wine like he was nothing. But Nolan Reyes was already gone. Have you ever seen someone realize in 1 second that they weren't actually in control of anything? Across the room, Aria stood frozen with her folders pressed against her chest. She'd watched Sienna pour the wine. She'd offered Nolan the napkin. And now she was watching something bigger than a stained shirt unfold in real time. Something that was going to cost jobs and reputations and maybe a whole company. Someone near the bar said it first, too loud. That was Nolan Reyes. The guy that was Nolan Reyes. The name spread like heat through the crowd. Elise hissed into Sienna's ear, loud enough now that the closest guest could hear every word. "The nobody you soaked? That was Nolan Reyes himself. The man whose signature we needed tonight. The only investor who could have saved this." Sienna's hand tightened around her phone until her knuckles went white. By the time the sun came up over New York, 40 million people had watched Sienna pour wine on the unknown guest. The clip had been posted, reposted, slowed down, zoomed in, and spliced with commentary about class and cruelty and what happens when rich people forget that everyone is watching now. Former Arista employees who'd stayed quiet for years started posting anonymous stories about late-night tirades, impossible demands, and assistants who'd quit without notice because the culture was poison. The stock didn't just slide anymore. It dove. By 8 in the morning, Arista had lost 30% of its market value. By 9, 2 board members had resigned. By 10, the financial news channels were running split screens. Sienna's frozen smile on one side, Nolan's calm face from an old investor conference on the other. Aria sat on her couch in Brooklyn in an oversized shirt that used to be her ex-boyfriend's, phone lighting her face in the gray morning dim. She'd been awake all night, scrolling through the feeds, watching the story mutate and spread. Someone had isolated a frame of her offering the napkin and turned it into a meme about being brave in small ways. Another account had zoomed in on her face and claimed she was secretly Nolan's girlfriend sent to spy. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter once the internet decided on a story. She paused the clip on a still of Nolan's face, the moment right after the wine hit, before he'd started moving toward the elevator. His jaw was tight, but his eyes were steady, looking at Sienna like he was memorizing something important. Aria traced the outline of his jaw on her screen without meaning to, surprised by her own reaction. There was something about the way he'd stayed calm that had gotten under her skin, something about the control it must have taken not to shout or push back. She zoomed in on his eyes and felt something twist in her chest that she didn't want to name yet. Her phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Mandatory crisis meeting, Arista leadership, today, 12 p.m., attendance required. Have you ever watched a scandal online and realized you were there? Part of the background? Aria set her phone down and pressed her palms against her eyes. She hadn't done anything wrong. She'd offered a napkin, She'd been kind when everyone else had stayed frozen. But she knew how this worked. When companies started sinking, they looked for people to blame, and assistants were always the easiest targets. Outside her window, Brooklyn was waking up. Trucks rumbled past. Someone's alarm went off and got snoozed. A dog barked 3 times and stopped. Arya stood up, legs stiff from sitting too long, and walked to her closet. She pulled out her most professional dress, the one she saved for presentations and performance reviews, and laid it on the bed. Her phone buzzed again. Another news alert. Another hot take. Another million views. By noon, she'd have to sit in a room with Sienna and Cole and pretend she didn't know that the whole world was watching them fall. She picked up her phone one more time and paused the video on Nolan's face again, studying the way he'd looked at Sienna like he was making a decision that would cost her everything. And she wondered, just for a second, what it felt like to have that kind of power and choose to use it. Sienna slammed a printed screenshot of Arya at the edge of the frame onto the glass conference table. The paper slid across the glossy surface and stopped right in front of Arya's chair. In the image, Arya was frozen mid-step, napkin extended, her face caught in that split second before she decided to help someone everyone else had ignored. "Explain this," Sienna said. The conference room sat 40 floors above Manhattan, glass walls on 3 sides, showing the city sprawled below like a game board. The chairs were too big, designed to make people feel smaller than they were. Arya sat with her spine straight, hands folded on the table, while 6 other staff members lined the walls like they were waiting for sentencing. Cole stood behind Sienna, arms crossed, tie still perfect even though it was barely noon and the company was bleeding money by the minute. "You were there," Sienna continued. "You watched me interact with a guest. You didn't warn me. You didn't pull me aside. You just let me walk into the biggest mistake of my career." Arya's throat felt tight, but she kept her voice steady. "I didn't know who he was. That's not the point." Sienna leaned forward, perfume heavy and expensive, her manicured finger tracing the outline of Nolan's face on the printout. "The point is optics. The point is that every single person in this photo is now part of the story, and some of you made us look worse by doing nothing." Cole shifted his weight. "We need a unified message. The press is calling this a culture issue, and we need to flip that. Make it about one bad moment, one misunderstanding. You want us to lie?" Arya said quietly. The room went silent. Sienna straightened, her eyes locking on Arya with the kind of focus that had made junior staff quit without notice. "I want you to do your job. Your job is to protect this company, to protect me. If you can't do that, there's the door." Around the room, the other staff members looked at their phones, the table, anywhere, but at Arya. "Have you ever been told to lie at work to protect someone powerful?" Arya felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been bending for months, finally snapping straight. She stood up, slowly, and gathered her notebook and pen. "I stepped toward him with a napkin because it was the right thing to do," she said. "And if doing the right thing cost me this job, then I don't want it." She walked toward the door, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Behind her, someone's chair creaked. Cole muttered something to Sienna. No one stopped her. She made it to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. Her hands were shaking. The doors opened, and she stepped inside, alone, and let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like years. As the elevator dropped, her phone buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. Texas area code. Arya almost declined the call. Her thumb hovered over the red button while the elevator descended and her heart still hammered from walking out of that conference room. But something made her answer. Maybe it was the timing. Maybe it was the fact that she'd just burned her career to the ground and had nothing left to lose. "Hello, Ms. Collins." The voice was low, composed, familiar even though she'd only heard it once in person. "You stepped toward me with a napkin when no one else moved." Arya's breath caught. "Mr. Reyes." "Nolan," he corrected. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby, and Arya walked out into the noise of midday Manhattan. People rushing, taxis honking, construction somewhere making the sidewalk vibrate under her feet. She pressed the phone tighter to her ear and found a quiet spot near a coffee shop window. "How did you get my number?" "I have good researchers." There was a pause. "I saw the clip. You were the only person who moved." Arya leaned against the brick wall, closing her eyes. I just got fired for it. Or I quit. I'm not sure which one happened. Good, Nolan said, and she could hear something like approval in his voice. That place was going to take more from you than it ever gave back. You don't know that. I do, though. His voice dropped lower, and Arya found herself unconsciously rubbing the spot on her fingers where she'd brushed his hand with a napkin. I've been watching Arista for 6 months. I know exactly what kind of culture Sienna built. The question is, do you? Arya opened her eyes and watched people stream past on the sidewalk, all of them with somewhere to be, none of them having just walked away from everything they'd worked for. Why are you calling me? She asked. Because I want to know the truth. Not the press release version. Not the sanitized story they'll try to sell. I want to know what it's really like working for someone who treats people like furniture. Arya's chest tightened. She thought about late nights rewriting press releases because Sienna didn't like the tone. About assistants crying in bathroom stalls. About the way everyone walked on glass around the executive floor, afraid one wrong word would cost them everything. It's exactly as bad as you think it is, she said quietly. Nolan was silent for a moment. Then, will you meet with me? Off-site. No recordings. Just a conversation. Why would I do that? Because you just chose honesty over a paycheck, and I think you might be the only person in that whole company who still knows the difference. He paused. And because I'm building something better, and I could use someone with a conscience. Would you risk your job to tell the truth to someone who could change everything? Arya's heart was racing again, but for a different reason now. Where? Austin. My office overlooks Lake Travis. I'll arrange travel if you say yes. All you have to do is show up and tell me what really happened behind those closed doors. Arya looked up at the Arista building, 40 floors of glass and steel and polished surfaces hiding right underneath. Then she looked at her phone at the unknown Texas number that was offering her something that felt like a door opening instead of closing. I'll think about it, she said. Don't think too long, Nolan replied. The offer expires when someone else says yes. The call ended. Arya stood there with her phone in her hand, the city moving around her, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe all the way down to the bottom of her lungs. Her phone buzzed again. A text from the same number. Flight leaves LaGuardia tomorrow at 9 a.m. First class. Car will pick you up at 7. Only if you're ready. The Texas heat hit her first. Arya stepped off the plane into air that felt thick and alive, so different from the sharp cold she'd left behind in New York that morning. The car Nolan had sent was waiting at the curb. Not a limo, just a clean black sedan with a driver who nodded once and took her bag without small talk. They drove out of the city and into hills covered in low trees and limestone outcrops, the land opening up in a way that made her chest feel less tight. Then they turned onto a private road that curved down toward the water, and she saw the house. Glass and steel and wood built into the hillside, so it looked like part of the landscape instead of something dropped on top of it. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the lake below, blue and still in the morning light. The car stopped, and Arya got out, her heels sinking slightly into the gravel drive. Then she saw him. Nolan stood on the porch in jeans and a white t-shirt, barefoot, hair still slightly damp like he'd just showered. No suit, no tie, just a man in his own space. And his eyes hit her second, steady, dark, taking her in the same way he'd looked at Sienna in that ballroom, like he was deciding something important. You came, he said. You bought me a plane ticket, Arya replied. He smiled just a little. I buy a lot of plane tickets. Most people still don't show up. He led her inside, and the space opened up around them. Cool stone floors under her feet, the lake spreading out through those huge windows like a painting that moved. There was no clutter, no showing off, just clean lines and comfortable furniture, and the sense that someone actually lived here instead of just staging it for photos. Coffee? Nolan asked. Please. She followed him into the kitchen, and while he poured, she noticed the faint scar on his forearm, pale against tense skin, the kind of mark you get from something hot or sharp catching you by surprise. He caught her looking and didn't hide it. Banquet fryer. I was 17. He handed her the mug. Burned myself pulling prime rib for some executive who complained it wasn't rare enough, even though it was perfect. Arya wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic. Fresno. You did research. You're not the only one with good researchers. He laughed, and the sound was lower and easier than she'd expected. Fair. They moved to the windows and stood looking out at the water. Arya felt him shift closer to point at something across the lake, a cluster of houses on the far shore, and his shoulder brushed hers. The touch was brief, but she felt the heat of it, felt the way her body registered his proximity before her mind caught up. That's where the old Austen families live, he said. Generational money. They barely know I exist, which is how I like it. Why? Because I built this from nothing. He turned to look at her. Hotel work. Night classes. Student loans I just finished paying off 3 years ago. I don't need their approval. Arya met his eyes. I started in community college, worked retail, and took PR courses online. Moved to New York with $800 in a suitcase. And clawed your way into Arista. And clawed my way into Arista, she confirmed. They stood there in the charged silence, morning light catching the sharp line of his jaw, and Arya realized she was seeing the part of him the world never got to see, the part before the suits and the boardrooms and the billion-dollar deals. Have you ever visited someone's home and realized you were seeing the part of them the world never gets to see? Nolan moved to the table and slid a folder across the smooth wood surface. It had a working title printed on the front, Respect Standard, a new model for beauty and care. This is what I'm building, he said, but I need someone who understands the culture I'm trying to fight. Arya opened the folder and started reading. Her pulse picked up with every page. I don't want a spin doctor, Nolan said. I want a conscience with a sharp pen. Arya looked up from the folder. Pages spread across the table between them. The proposal was detailed: funding structures, ethical guidelines for worker treatment, plans to partner with hospitals and community health centers instead of luxury retailers. It was everything Arista wasn't. This is going to lose you money at first, she said. I know. The industry will fight you. The big players will call it performative. They'll dig into your background, looking for anything that makes you look like a hypocrite. Let them look. Nolan leaned back in his chair, the ceiling fan turning slowly above them. I've got nothing to hide except a work history that proves I know what it feels like to be treated like I don't matter. Arya traced her finger along the edge of a page, reading the section about mandatory respect protocols and third-party culture audits. Why me? You could hire someone with bigger credentials. Someone who hasn't just walked out of a job with no plan. Because credentials don't mean anything if the person using them doesn't believe in what they're selling. He paused. And because when everyone else stood still, you moved. The words settled between them, heavy and real. Arya thought about her empty apartment in Brooklyn, about the emails that were probably piling up from former colleagues, asking what happened, about the LinkedIn messages from recruiters who'd want to know why she left such a high-profile position without something else lined up. And then she thought about spending another year writing press releases that covered up cruelty, about watching assistants burn out, about becoming someone who chose comfort over conscience. What's the catch? She asked. Nidea. You sign, you sever ties with Arista completely. No consulting, no friendly coffees with old colleagues, nothing that creates a conflict. Nolan pushed a pen across the table. And you work directly with me. Noble fare. No liars. If you think I'm wrong about something, you tell me. Arya picked up the pen, felt the weight of it in her hand. Her heart was pounding again, but this time it felt like possibility instead of panic. This could fail, she said. It could. We could lose everything. We could. He met her eyes. Or we could build something that proves treating people right doesn't have to be optional. Would you leave a toxic but stable job for a risky offer built on values? Arya's hand hovered over the signature line. The iced tea between them was sweating rings onto the coaster. Outside, the lake caught the afternoon sun and threw light across the ceiling in patterns that shifted and changed. She thought about the girl who'd moved to New York with $800. About the person she'd promised herself she'd be before the city and the job, and the compromises had worn her down to someone she barely recognized. I'll sign, she said. On one condition. Nolan raised an eyebrow. You tell me exactly why that wine incident hit you so deeply. The real story, not the sanitized version. His jaw tightened. For a second, she thought he'd refuse. thought maybe she'd pushed too far too fast. But then he nodded just once, and she saw something behind his eyes that looked like old pain finally finding its way to the surface. She signed her name, the ink dark and permanent on the white page. Nolan took the contract, set it aside, and looked at her for a long moment. Then he started talking. He told her about the first time a guest dumped a drink on him for bringing the wrong dessert. Nolan was 17, working at a hotel restaurant in Fresno during summer break from community college. The place wasn't fancy, but it tried to be, with cloth napkins and mood lighting and prices that made locals save up for anniversaries. The woman had ordered chocolate lava cake. The kitchen had run out. He'd brought her tiramisu instead, explained the situation politely, offered to comp the dessert and bring her something else from the bar. She'd looked at him, really looked at him, taking in his brown skin and his slightly too big server's vest and his careful pronunciation of words he'd practiced to sound professional, and poured her full glass of Coke down his back. "Teach him to listen," she'd said to her friends, laughing. The other servers had frozen. His manager had appeared, wiping her hands on her apron, already apologizing to the guest before even asking what happened. The woman had complained that he'd been rude, that he'd argued about the dessert, neither of which was true. "And I stood there," Nolan said quietly, "with soda soaking through my shirt and dripping into my shoes, and I apologized to her. My manager made me apologize." Aria's throat felt tight. "I went home that night, and my mom was already asleep because she worked the early shift at the hospital. I sat in the bathroom and scrubbed that vest in the sink, trying to get the stain out because I couldn't afford to replace it." His voice was steady, but his hands weren't, fingers tapping a rhythm on the table that didn't match anything. "And I promised myself that if I ever had power, real power, I'd use it every single time someone crossed that line." He looked up at Arya, and she saw the 17-year-old still living behind his eyes, still scrubbing that vest, still hearing laughter from people who'd never know what it cost to survive on $8 an hour plus tips. "That's why you pulled the deal," she said. "That's why I pulled the deal." The room was quiet except for the ceiling fan and the faint sound of water lapping against the shore outside. Arya felt something shift in her chest, the last wall of professional distance crumbling into something more complicated and more real. She reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He didn't pull away. His fingers stilled under hers, the warmth of skin on skin, and neither of them moved for 3 long seconds. Then 5, then 10. The contact stretched between them, charged with everything they hadn't said yet. Have you ever promised yourself that if you ever had power, you'd never treat people the way you were treated? "I'm glad you pulled it," Arya said finally. Nolan turned his hand over, palm to palm, and for just a moment his fingers curled around hers. Then he let go, but slowly, like he was letting something else go with it. Some piece of armor he'd been carrying for years. "We should," he started. His phone buzzed on the table, loud and insistent. He glanced at the screen, and his whole body went rigid. "What?" Arya asked. He turned the phone so she could see. Security alert. 2 visitors at the front gate. Camera feed showing a black car. And standing in front of it, looking directly at the lens, Cole and Sienna, still wearing yesterday's clothes, looking like people who'd driven through the night with nowhere else to go. The story continues building tension as past and present collide, and Nolan must face the people who started this entire chain of events. The emotional stakes rise as professional boundaries blur and true motivations are revealed. Sienna stood at his door with mascara streaked down her cheeks, clutching a folder that no longer meant anything. The porch light caught every wrinkle in last night's gown. The silk crumpled and stained with coffee or wine or both. Her hair hung loose instead of pulled back in that tight style that made her look untouchable. Cole stood behind her, tie loosened and crooked, eyes red like he hadn't slept. Nolan looked at them through the screen door for a long moment before speaking. "It's 7 in the morning. We drove all night," Sienna said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "Please, just 5 minutes." Behind Nolan, Arya appeared in one of his spare shirts, the fabric hanging past her knees, her hair still messy from sleep. She stopped when she saw who was at the door, and something sharp passed between the 3 of them. Awareness, tension, the kind of charge that comes when past and present collide. Sienna's eyes flicked from Nolan's bare feet to Arya, standing slightly behind him, and her expression shifted through several emotions too fast to name. 5 minutes, Nolan said, opening the door. They moved to the kitchen, nobody sitting, everyone standing around the island like boxers waiting for the bell. The folder sat between them, edges softened from being held too tightly for too many hours. "I'm sorry," Sienna said. The words came out flat, practiced, like she'd rehearsed them the whole drive. "What I did was wrong. I was under pressure and I took it out on you, and I'm sorry." Nolan crossed his arms. "What kind of pressure?" Cole stepped forward. "The board. The investors. Everyone breathing down our necks about growth and market share, and—" "No." Arya's voice cut through. "Don't do that. Don't blame other people for what you chose to do." Sienna flinched like she'd been slapped. "We felt like we had to be perfect all the time," Sienna said, looking at Arya now instead of Nolan. "Like one mistake would destroy everything we built. So we acted like nothing could touch us. Like we were untouchable. And that made you think you could pour wine on people?" Nolan asked. "No. Yes." Sienna's hand shook as she pushed hair out her face. "I don't know. I was terrified you'd see through me. See that I didn't belong in that room either. So I made you smaller to make myself feel bigger." The admission hung in the air, raw and ugly. "Do you believe an apology means anything after public damage is already done?" Cole shifted his weight. "We're hoping we can still work something out. Modified terms. Smaller stake. Anything." "The deal is dead," Nolan said flatly. Sienna nodded like she'd expected that. But then she asked the question nobody saw coming. "If I walk away from Arista, will you help me learn how not to be this person anymore?" Arya's breath caught. Nolan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Why would I do that?" he asked. "Because you know what it's like to promise yourself you'll be different if you ever get power." Sienna's voice dropped. "And I broke that promise. But maybe it's not too late to keep it." Nolan told them to leave. Watched them walk back to their car, drive away through the morning heat already building over the lake. But Arya couldn't shake the way Sienna had looked at her, like she was searching for something she'd lost and didn't know how to find again. 3 hours later, they were still talking about it. Nolan paced the length of the kitchen while Arya sat at the island, both of them circling the same question from different angles. The coffee had gone cold between printed balance sheets and trend reports that didn't matter anymore. "She's manipulating you," Arya said. "This is what she does. She reads people and tells them what they want to hear." "Maybe." Nolan stopped pacing. "Or maybe watching her company burn in real time actually changed something." "People don't change that fast. People change when they hit bottom hard enough." Arya stood up, moving around the island to face him directly. "You owe her nothing. Less than nothing. She humiliated you in front of hundreds of people." "I know. And now she shows up here, in your home, asking you to save her from herself." "I'm not going to partner with her." Nolan's voice was steady. "But I could share the policy framework we're building. Let her see what real worker protection looks like. No money, no stock, just information." Arya felt her chest tighten with something she didn't want to name. "Why?" "Because if she actually implements it at Arista, or wherever she goes next, that's thousands of people whose lives get better. And I can't ignore that just because I'm angry." The logic was sound. Arya knew it was sound. But logic didn't explain the knot in her stomach or the way her hands had curled into fists. Under the island, Nolan's knee brushed hers. Neither of them moved away. The contact was slight but charged, a reminder of everything that had shifted between them in the past 48 hours. "What if she uses it against you?" Arya asked quietly. "What if she takes your ideas and claims them as hers, and you end up looking like the one copying her? Then we'll deal with it." He stepped closer. "But I can't make decisions based on fear of what someone might do. I have to make them based on what's right." Arya looked up at him, at the scar on his forearm and the steady way he held himself even when everything around him was chaos. She thought about the girl who'd offer a napkin because it was right, even though it might cost her everything. "Okay," she said, "but I'm writing the terms. And if she steps 1 inch out of line, we're done." Nolan smiled just a little. "Fair." Sienna noticed the way their knees stayed pressed together under the island, The way Arya's body angled toward Nolan's, even when she was arguing with him. Something flickered across her face. Envy, maybe, or recognition of something she'd never had. Should personal growth excuse past harm? Or should consequences stand no matter what? I'll call her, Arya said. Set up boundaries. Make it clear this isn't friendship or partnership. It's education. One time, Nolan nodded. Thank you. But later that night, after he'd gone to bed, Arya sat on the balcony with her laptop and drafted something else entirely. Not terms, not boundaries, something harder and more necessary. She titled it, Warning Label for Your Soul. This isn't PR, Arya typed. This is a warning label for your soul. The balcony overlooked the lake, water below reflecting city lights from the far shore, turning the darkness into scattered gold. Arya's face glowed in the laptop screen, fingers moving fast across the keys. She wrote it all out, every pattern she'd seen at Arista. The way Sienna's voice would go cold when she was about to fire someone. The assistants who'd learned to time bathroom breaks around her moods. The culture of fear dressed up as high standards. You made people smaller so you could feel bigger. You rewarded cruelty and called it strength. You built an empire on the backs of people you never bothered to know. The words poured out, months of watching and staying silent finally finding their way to the surface. Arya didn't soften anything, didn't spin it or package it in diplomatic language. Just truth, sharp and clean. Behind her, the balcony door slid open. Nolan stepped out in a t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot on the warm wood. He didn't ask what she was doing, just stood close enough that her arm brushed his as she typed. You're really sending that? He asked quietly, reading over her shoulder. She needs to hear it from someone who isn't trying to get something from her. She might hate you for it. Good. Hate is honest. Arya's fingers paused over the keyboard. If she's really trying to change, she needs to see herself through someone else's eyes. Not the version she tells herself. The real one. She kept typing. Offered to connect Sienna with former staff for real apologies. Not the polished kind for cameras, but the raw, uncomfortable kind that actually cost something. Laid out exactly what accountability looked like when it wasn't performative. If you want to stop being this person, you have to stop protecting yourself from the truth. That means sitting in rooms where people tell you what you did to them. No lawyers. No PR team. Just you listening for once in your life. Nolan's hand moved to her shoulder, thumb tracing a small circle against the fabric of the shirt she'd borrowed. The touch was grounding, steady. You're braver than you know, he said. Arya looked up at him, at the way the laptop light caught the angles of his face. I learned from someone. Their eyes held for a beat longer than necessary. Then Arya turned back to the screen, added one more paragraph, and hit send before she could second-guess herself. The email disappeared into the digital void. Somewhere in a hotel room, or a car, or a house that no longer felt like home, Sienna would read it and have to decide what kind of person she was going to be next. Have you ever told someone in power the truth they didn't want to hear? Arya's phone rang 30 minutes later. Unknown number. She looked at Nolan. He nodded. She answered. I read it. Sienna's voice came through, rough and small. 3 times. And I want to do the meeting. The one with former staff. No lawyers. You moderate. I'll listen. She paused. Thank you for not lying to me. The call ended. Arya set her phone down and let out a breath she'd been holding since she'd hit send. Nolan pulled her to her feet, and without planning it, without asking, she stepped into him. His arms came around her, and they stood there on the balcony, breathing in sync, while the lake reflected light they couldn't see up close. Sienna walked into the rented conference room, where 4 former assistants sat in a row, each with a folder of their own. The space was deliberately plain, no windows, no branding, no cameras. Just a long table, plain chairs, a pitcher of water, and a box of tissues already placed at the center like someone knew they'd be needed. Arya sat at the head of the table. Nolan waited outside in the hallway, giving them space but close enough to step in if things went wrong. Thank you for coming, Arya said to the 4 women. Their ages ranged from mid-20s to late 30s. And they all had the same look in their eyes, fear mixed with determination. The first woman opened her folder. My name is Jessica. I worked at Arista for 2 years. I quit without notice after you screamed at me for 20 minutes because a vendor was late to a meeting I didn't even schedule. Sienna's mouth opened, then closed. She'd been about to defend herself. Arya caught her eye and shook her head once. Just listen. Jessica kept going. You told me I was useless, that anyone off the street could do my job better. You made me stand in your office while you called the vendor, and you kept pointing at me like I was evidence of how incompetent your staff was. Sienna's face had gone pale. The second woman spoke. I'm Keisha. You fired me for taking a sick day to go to my grandmother's funeral. You said if I couldn't prioritize the company, I didn't belong there. I'm Maya. You made me rewrite the same press release 9 times in one night. Not because it was wrong, because you were in a bad mood and wanted someone to feel worse. The fourth woman's hand shook as she opened her folder. I'm Devon. I worked for you for 3 months. I had panic attacks every morning before work. My therapist told me to quit or I'd end up in the hospital. Sienna's carefully built defenses were crumbling. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She just sat there, listening, letting every word hit her like the drinks she'd poured on others. I'm sorry, she whispered. We're not done. Arya said gently but firmly. Each woman took her turn laying out specific incidents, dates, moments when Sienna's cruelty had crossed lines that shouldn't exist in any workplace. The air in the room grew thick with years of held pain finally being spoken out loud. If you had hurt people on your way up, could you sit and listen to them like this? An hour in, Arya called a break. She stepped into the hallway, where Nolan was pacing, phone in hand, but not looking at it, just moving because he couldn't stay still. When he saw her, he closed the distance in 3 steps. She walked straight into his arms, and they held each other longer than professionalism justified, her face pressed against his chest, his hand in her hair. How is it? He asked quietly. Hard. Necessary. Real. They stayed like that until Arya's phone timer went off. She pulled back, smoothed her shirt, and went back inside. Devon was sliding a flash drive across the table. Before we finish, you need to see what Cole has been doing in your name. Sienna stared at the small piece of metal and plastic like it might explode. What is it? She asked. Messages. Internal documents. Proof that while you were being cruel, he was being criminal. The screen filled with internal messages proving Cole coerced staff into hiding product issues and retaliated against anyone who spoke up. Arya's conference room in Austin. They'd moved locations for this part, went silent except for the click of the mouse as she scrolled through file after file. Nolan had pulled a chair up beside hers, close enough that their shoulders pressed together, and neither of them moved as the evidence unfolded. Message after message showing Cole threatening employees with blacklisting if they reported safety concerns to regulators. Spreadsheets with 2 sets of numbers, one for internal use, one for the public. Photos of products with visible defects that had been shipped anyway. I didn't know, Sienna said, but her voice was hollow. You didn't ask, Maria countered. You were so busy making people afraid of you that you never noticed what he was doing behind your back. Nolan leaned forward, reading a thread that detailed how Cole had paid off a testing lab to bury results showing dangerous levels of metals in a skincare line aimed at teens. His jaw went tight. This isn't just corporate misconduct, he said. This is criminal. People could have been hurt. People were hurt, Devon said quietly. She pulled up a folder on her phone, showed them screenshots of customer complaints that had been deleted from the company systems. We tried to tell someone, but everyone was too scared of Sienna to push it up the chain, and Cole made sure it never reached the board. Sienna looked like she might be sick. The perfect veneer had finally cracked all the way through, showing the scared person underneath. I built this, she whispered. The culture that made everyone too afraid to tell me the truth. I did this. Arya's fingers tightened around the mouse. She kept scrolling, kept finding more evidence of shortcuts and cover-ups and retaliation. Every click revealed another layer of rot. During a pause in the scrolling, Nolan shifted his chair even closer, their knees touching now, breath mingling as they leaned toward the screen together. The intimacy of the moment was charged as spite, or maybe because of the heavy content they were processing. What do we do with this? Sienna asked. We Arya turned to look at her. There is no we. You take this to regulators before they find it themselves. You go public with what Cole did and what culture allowed it to happen. That will destroy the company. The company deserves to be destroyed, Nolan said flatly. The question is whether you want to be destroyed with it, or whether you want to be the one who stopped it. Is looking away from wrongdoing the same as causing it? Sienna looked at the four women who'd sat through hours of her apologies, at Arya who'd told her the truth she didn't want to hear, at Nolan who'd refused to look away from a line that shouldn't be crossed. I'll do it, she said. I'll confess everything. On camera. Before anyone forces me to. Arya sat back, releasing a breath. Then we write it together. Every word. And you don't get to soften a single thing. If I'm going to burn, Sienna said, voice steadier now, I want to choose the match. The truth continues to unravel as personal accountability collides with systemic corruption, forcing everyone to decide what kind of justice they believe in and what price they're willing to pay for it. If I'm going to burn, Sienna said, I want to choose the match. The small studio smelled like fresh paint and electrical heat from the ring light positioned 2 feet from Sienna's face. No glam team this time. No makeup artist hovering with powder. Just Sienna in a plain black shirt, hair pulled back, sitting under white light that showed every line and shadow. Arya sat behind the camera with a laptop open, reading from the script they'd spent 6 hours writing. Nolan stood near the door, arms crossed, watching both women work through something that could either end this or make it infinitely worse. From the top, Arya said, and remember, you don't get to soften anything. Sienna nodded, took a breath, and looked directly into the lens. My name is Sienna Maddox. I built Orista Beauty on the backs of people I treated like they were disposable. I screamed at assistants for mistakes that weren't theirs. I created a culture where everyone was afraid to tell me the truth. And when someone finally held me accountable, I poured wine on him like he was nothing. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she kept going. They ran the take 3 times. Each time, Sienna got stronger, clearer, more willing to own what she'd done. Between takes, Nolan moved behind Arya's chair to adjust her headset microphone, his fingers brushing the back of her neck, a touch so gentle it made her skin warm. Sienna noticed. Her eyes tracked the gesture, the way Nolan's hand lingered half a second longer than necessary, the way Arya's shoulders relaxed under his touch. Something flickered across Sienna's face that might have been envy or might have been recognition of something she'd never had. That's the one, Arya said after the 4th take. We release it tomorrow morning. Sienna stood up, legs shaking slightly. What happens after? People will be angry, Nolan said. Some will say you're only doing this to save yourself. Some will respect it. Either way, you'll have told the truth before someone forced you to. And Cole. Arya closed her laptop. Cole will come for us. For all of us. He's not going to let this go without a fight. Would you trust a confession from someone who once used cameras only for bragging? They scheduled the release for 6 in the morning, early enough to catch the East Coast news cycle, late enough that legal teams would still be half asleep when it went live. But at 3 in the morning, Nolan's phone lit up with alerts. Someone had leaked the draft. Cole had gotten hold of it, and he'd just gone live with his own version of events, one that painted Nolan as a vengeful billionaire using a desperate woman to destroy a competitor, and Arya as an obsessed former employee who couldn't handle being fired. The counterattack had begun. Cole went live first, and his story was poison wrapped in charm. Split-screen news panels showed his face on the left, perfectly lit, tie straight, voice steady, while headlines scrolled on the right. Beauty executive claims retaliation. Whistleblower or revenge plot. Inside the battle for Orista, Nolan and Arya watched from his couch in Austin, laptops open, phones buzzing so constantly they'd both turned off notifications just to think straight. Cole had receipts, or at least things that looked like receipts if you didn't examine them too closely. He showed emails from Arya, real emails taken out of context, that made her sound ambitious and calculating. He framed Nolan's withdrawal not as a stand on principle, but as market manipulation designed to tank a competitor and swoop in later with a cheaper offer. He's good, Arya said quietly, voice tight. He knows exactly which pieces to show and which to hide. Influencers who'd partnered with Arista started weighing in. Some defended Cole. Some stayed silent. A few brave ones pushed back, but they were drowning in the flood of hot takes and conspiracy theories. On screen, Cole leaned forward with practiced concern. I've known Sienna for years. She's under enormous pressure, and I think certain people saw an opportunity to exploit that vulnerability for their own gain. Nolan's hand tightened around his phone. He's calling you a predator, Arias said. He's making it sound like you manipulated her into turning on him. I know what he's doing. So what do we do? Nolan stood up, pacing the length of the living room, while Lake Travis stretched dark and still beyond the windows. His disciplined control was cracking at the edges, anger bleeding through in the set of his jaw and the way his hands kept curling into fists. We release Sienna's full confession anyway. We don't change a word, and we let people decide who's telling the truth. And if they don't believe us, then we deal with it. He turned to face her. But I'm not backing down because someone with better PR got ahead of the story. Aria's hand flew to her mouth as another headline rolled across the screen. Former employee's obsession. Inside Aria Collins' ear at Arista. They found her performance reviews. Found the time she'd sent 3 follow-up emails on a project Sienna had ignored. Made it look like harassment instead of someone trying to do her job. Have you ever had your story twisted by someone with more power or followers? Nolan crossed to the couch and gently pulled her hand down from her face, lacing their fingers together. The stress had drawn them closer over the past days, but this was different. This was choosing each other when everything else was falling apart. They can't twist the truth forever, he said quietly. Then both their phones lit up at once with the same alert. Federal regulators had just announced a formal investigation into Arista and into Reyes Capital's sudden withdrawal from the partnership. Now everyone would have to testify under oath. Nolan sat under bright hearing room lights, right hand raised, cameras rolling from 6 different angles. The wood paneling behind the committee made the space feel old and serious, like the kind of room where consequences actually stuck. Microphones captured every breath. Photographers lined the back wall, flashes going off in bursts that left spots in Nolan's vision. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Edo. The committee chair, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, opened a thick binder and looked at him over the rim. Mr. Reyes, can you explain the timing of your withdrawal from the Arista partnership? Nolan kept his voice level. I withdrew because I witnessed behavior that violated my personal and professional standards for how workers should be treated. You're referring to the wine incident. I'm referring to a pattern of disrespect that the wine incident made impossible to ignore. The questions came fast after that. Why had he attended the gala incognito? Why hadn't he given Arista a chance to apologize before pulling funding? Was his new venture designed to capitalize on Arista's collapse? Behind him in the audience section, Aria sat with her hands folded tight in her lap, pride and fear warring on her face. Every time a committee member tried to frame Nolan as opportunistic, she wanted to stand up and shout. Every time he answered with unwavering calm, she felt something in her chest expand. During a break, Nolan leaned back his chair so far that his shoulder nearly touched Aria's knee where she sat in the row behind him. He turned his head slightly, just enough that she could hear. You holding up? He asked quietly. Better than you, probably. Liar. He almost smiled. Dinner after this? Somewhere with no cameras. Deal. The moment eased some of the tension for both of them. A reminder that whatever happened in this room, they'd face it together. When the session resumed, the questioning shifted. A younger committee member pulled up documents on the screen behind Nolan. Internal Arista communications he'd never seen before. Mr. Reyes, were you aware that Ms. Maddox and Mr. Hayes had discussed your background extensively before the gala? That they knew exactly who you were when the wine incident occurred? Nolan's jaw tightened. No, I was not aware of that. And does that change your testimony about whether this was a spontaneous act or a calculated one? The room went silent. Nolan looked at the messages on the screen, Sienna and Cole trading text about the Fresno kid and whether he'd be easy to manage or would need to be put in his place early. Do you think billionaires should answer publicly for every choice they make in private companies? It doesn't change my testimony, Nolan said finally. It makes it worse. But my response was based on what I witnessed, not what I later learned. And I stand by it. The committee chair made a note. We'll be calling Ms. Maddox to testify next week, and Mr. Hayes the week after. This committee will get to the truth, regardless of who benefits from it. After 6 hours, they released him. Nolan walked out into the hallway where Arya was waiting, and the press photographers rushed forward. But all he saw was her. The committee had hinted they had more messages, more evidence, and now Sienna would have to decide whether to protect Cole or confirm everything Nolan and Arya had been saying. Sienna had 12 hours to decide whether to protect Cole or tell the whole truth under oath. The hotel room looked like a crime scene, half-packed suitcase on the bed, clothes spilling out onto the floor, room service tray with cold coffee nobody had touched. The curtains were half open to neon streaks from the street below, casting everything in unstable light. Arya had come alone. Nolan had offered, but this conversation needed to happen woman to woman, without his presence changing the dynamic. They're going to ask you about the texts, Arya said. The ones where you and Cole talked about putting Nolan in his place before you even met him. Sienna sat on the edge of the bed, head in her hands. I don't remember those texts. You sent them 3 days before the gala. I sent 100 texts a day. She stopped, took a breath. I was scared of him, of what it would mean if someone with his background and his money didn't need us. Didn't need me. Arya sat down beside her, close enough that their knees almost touched. So you decided to humiliate him first. Make him small before he could make you feel small. Yes. The admission came out broken. And Cole. Sienna looked up, eyes red. Cole told me to do it. He said it would set the tone for the partnership. That if we let Nolan think he was equal to us from the start, we'd never control the narrative. So the wine was planned. The wine was improvised. But the intent behind it, that was Cole's strategy. Arya felt something cold settle in her stomach. This was worse than she'd thought. Not a moment of cruelty under pressure, but a calculated move to establish dominance over someone they saw as a threat. If you testify to that, Arya said carefully, you're done. With Cole. With whatever life you built together. You understand that. I know. And if you don't, if you protect him, then everything you said in that confession video was a performance. People will know. I'll know. Sienna stood up and moved to the window, pressing her forehead against the glass. Arya followed, standing close enough that when Sienna spoke, their foreheads almost touched. A moment of raw intimacy that had nothing romantic in it. Just two women sharing the unbearable weight of truth. I loved him, Sienna whispered. Or I thought I did. He made me feel powerful. And I didn't realize until now that real power doesn't come from making other people afraid. Would you testify against someone you once loved if it meant saving people you've never met? Arya's voice was steady. Then prove it. Get on that stand and tell the truth, even if it costs you everything. Sienna pulled back, searched Arya's eyes for any trace of manipulation or hidden agenda. Found only exhaustion and conviction. Will Nolan forgive me? Eventually, I don't know. That's not why you should do this. Then why should I? Because it's the only way you become someone new. Not someone forgiven. Someone different. The words hung between them in the neon-streaked darkness. Then Sienna pulled out her phone and typed one line to Nolan. Put me first on the witness list. She hit send before she could change her mind. Sienna walked into the hearing room without glam, hair pulled back, carrying no handbag, only a stack of papers. The camera zoomed in immediately, capturing her bare face for the first time in a public setting. No contouring, no false lashes, just a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days and had stopped caring about hiding it. The oath, the chair, the microphone's hot and waiting. Ms. Maddox, can you describe the events of the evening in question? Sienna's voice shook but held steady. I poured wine on Nolan Reyes because my business partner told me it would establish control over the partnership. Because I was afraid of someone who came from nothing and built more than I had. Because I'd spent years treating people like they were beneath me, and I'd forgotten how to see them as human. The room went dead silent. She kept reading from her prepared statement, looking up only occasionally to meet the camera's eye. She admitted to the abusive culture, confirmed Cole's role in covering up product safety issues, acknowledged that Nolan's refusal to stay silent had probably saved customers from harm. I enabled a system where anyone who spoke truth to power was punished. And I did it because being feared felt safer than being vulnerable. In the audience, Arya gripped Nolan's hand. He sat perfectly still, witnessing a version of Sienna he'd never seen. Someone willing to burn her own reputation to protect others. Does public truth-telling like this change your view of someone who hurt others? The committee asked harder questions. Why had she waited until now? How much had she known about Cole's activities? Why should anyone believe this wasn't just another performance? I can't make anyone believe me, Sienna said. All I can do is tell you what I know and accept the consequences. If that means I never work in this industry again, I understand. If it means civil penalties and my name attached to failure instead of success, I accept that. After 3 hours of testimony, they released her for the day. She gathered her papers with shaking hands and walked toward the exit. In the hallway, she passed Nolan. For a brief second, their bodies were close enough that she could smell his cologne, cedar, and something clean, and he could hear her uneven breath. The air between them was charged with complicated history, with choices that couldn't be unmade, with the strange intimacy of two people who'd hurt each other and were now trying to figure out what came next. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded once and kept walking. An hour later, the committee announced its preliminary findings. Criminal referrals would focus on Cole for fraud and regulatory violations. Civil penalties and industry bans would also hit Sienna for creating the culture that enabled it. And they wanted to review Nolan's new company plans to make sure he wasn't profiting from a disaster he'd helped create. Nobody got a clean exit, but at least now, everyone was dealing with the truth. As the regulatory process continues, the characters must face the reality that doing the right thing doesn't guarantee a happy ending. It just guarantees you can live with yourself when it's over. The same regulators who just praised Nolan's ethics now questioned whether his new venture was exploiting the scandal. The emails started arriving within hours of Sienna's testimony. Committee members wanted detailed business plans. Media outlets framed Nolan as opportunistic, someone who'd orchestrated a competitor's downfall just to swoop in with his own version. Financial analysts debated his motives on morning shows while Nolan sat at his desk in Austin, watching his reputation shift from principled billionaire to calculated predator. "They're saying you planned this from the start," Arya said, reading from her laptop. "That the wine incident was just an excuse to destroy Arista and launch your own line." Nolan loosened his collar, the Austin heat making the house feel smaller than it was. Product concepts covered the whiteboard behind him. Policy documents spread across every surface. Video call windows blinked with lawyers and activists waiting for answers. "I didn't plan any of this," he said quietly. "I know that. But they don't." Arya stood and moved to the edge of his desk, perching there the way she'd started doing during their late-night strategy sessions. Their knees brushed every time she leaned over to annotate a document, and neither of them moved away. "Maybe they're right to question it," Nolan said. "Maybe I am profiting from someone else's pain." "Stop." Arya's voice was sharp. "You're creating something that actually protects workers. That's not exploitation. That's the opposite." But the guilt sat heavy in Nolan's chest anyway. He'd pulled his money and watched Arista collapse. Now he was building on the rubble. How was that different from any other billionaire using power to crush competition? Can doing the right thing still be questioned if it also brings you success? Arya reached over to pull up another document, her arm brushing his shoulder, and he caught her hand without thinking. Held it there for 3 seconds while the video calls blinked and the emails piled up and the world outside tried to decide what kind of man he really was. "We own the good we can do," she said. "That's what matters." His phone buzzed. New email. Subject line: Partnership proposal, St. David's Healthcare System. Nolan opened it and read in silence. A major hospital network wanted to pilot their ethical beauty and care line in 20 clinics across Texas. Fair wages, transparent sourcing, products designed for people who couldn't afford luxury brands but deserved dignity anyway. There was one condition: Sienna Maddox had to join the advisory board as a living lesson in reform. The email landed like a lit fuse between them. Contract pages scrolled past, funding terms, distribution networks, community partnerships, all contingent on Sienna's public involvement. The warm Austin evening light slanted through the windows, turning the papers on his desk gold, while emails continued stacking up with opinions he hadn't asked for. They want her visible, Arya said, reading over his shoulder. Not hidden in some consultant role. They want her standing next to us at launch events. Nolan's jaw tightened. I know. With her name on everything we build. I know, Arya. Do you? Her voice rose. Because this isn't just about forgiveness. This is about bringing the person who humiliated you into the most important thing you've ever built. You think I don't understand that? They were both standing now, voices climbing, the space between them shrinking as the argument heated up. Arya's hands curled into fists at her sides. Nolan's shoulders were tight with tension that had nothing to do with the contract. I think you're so focused on being the bigger person that you're forgetting she doesn't deserve this, Arya said. And what if helping thousands of people means giving one person a second chance they don't deserve? Then you're not just forgiving her. You're rewarding her. Or I'm showing her what accountability actually looks like when it has teeth. Nolan stepped closer. They were inches apart now, breathing hard, the line between professional and personal nearly snapping under the weight of everything unsaid. Would you bring someone who hurt you into your new life if it meant helping thousands of others? Arya's eyes searched his face. This isn't about Sienna for you. It's about proving you're different from everyone who ever looked down on you. That you're better than them. Maybe it is. So what? So you don't have to prove anything to anyone. Her voice dropped, went soft in a way that hit harder than the shouting. You've already shown who you are. Everyone who matters already knows. Nolan's hand came up to her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. And if I say yes to this, if I bring her in with strict boundaries and oversight, will you stay? I'm not going anywhere. But her voice shook. I'm just scared you'll regret choosing mercy over justice. I'm choosing both, he said. Justice is the rules we're putting in place. Mercy is giving her a chance to help us enforce them. Arya closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet. Then we do it our way, with boundaries so tight she can't breathe without permission. And the second she steps out of line, we cut her loose. Agreed. But instead of stepping back, Nolan stayed close, and Arya's hands came up to his chest, fingers curling into his shirt. The evening light caught them both, turned them golden, and for a moment they just breathed together while the contract waited and the world outside kept spinning. Then Nolan stepped back. I need to walk this off. He headed for the door, and Arya watched him go, out to the porch, down the steps, toward the iron gate where this whole decision would soon come to a head. Arya stood on the wrong side of the iron gate in a borrowed black dress, clutching a folder that could either restore a billion-dollar empire or destroy everything they had built together. Rain soaked her hair, plastered it against her cheeks. Thunder rolled across Lake Travis, turning the water dark and restless. Inside the house, lights glowed warm and steady. Outside, Arya shivered and called his name. Nolan. He stood on the other side of the gate, thumb hovering over his phone screen. The press release was drafted and ready, a statement declining the hospital partnership, citing concerns about optics and integrity. One button press, and Sienna would be shut out for good. Now the audience understood all the history. The wine, the hearings, the complicated path that had led two people from opposite sides of a scandal to this moment in the rain. She came me first, Arya said, voice cracking. 3 hours ago, Sienna called and said she knows she doesn't deserve this. That if her name is going to hurt what we're building, she'll walk away. Nolan's finger didn't move from the screen. But then she said something else. Arya pressed the folder against her chest, water beading on the manila surface. She said there are 6 junior staff still at Arista who are about to be named in lawsuits. Not because they did anything wrong, but because Cole is using them as shields. Their names will be dragged across financial news for a culture they never created. And she thinks joining our board will protect them how? Testimony, evidence, proof that the orders came from the top, not from assistants, just trying to keep their jobs. Arya stepped closer to the bars, close enough to see the conflict written across Nolan's face. I'm not asking you to forgive her for you. I'm asking you to use her for them. Rain streamed off Arya's hair, down her neck, soaking the borrowed dress until it clung to her frame. Lightning flickered in the distance, brief and bright. If you're Nolan at that gate, what would you choose? Clean break or complicated mercy? Nolan stepped closer to the gate. He reached through the iron bars and cupped the back of Arya's neck, his hand warm against her cold skin. Their eyes locked, his dark and searching, her steady despite the tears mixing with rain. If we do this, he said quietly, we do it our way. Boundaries written in stone. Oversight that never sleeps. And the second she forgets what this really is, we're done. I know. She's not our partner. She's our cautionary tale. I know. And you. His thumb traced a line along her jaw. You're the only partner I need. Arya's breath caught. Thunder rolled again, closer this time, and the rain fell harder, but neither of them moved. Nolan opened the gate. The metal swung wide with a sound like a decision being made. He pulled Arya inside, and she stumbled against him, folder dropping to the ground as his arms came around her. We do this together, he said into her wet hair. Every choice, every boundary, every hard decision. Together. Together, she whispered back. Inside the house, Nolan's laptop waited with the hospital's proposal still open. Outside, the rain kept falling. And somewhere in New York, Sienna Maddox sat by her phone, waiting for an answer that would define the rest of her life. 3 names appeared on the new foundation charter. Nolan Reyes, Arya Collins, and Sienna Maddox, with a compliance clause longer than any of their titles. The opening event took place in a modest but bright community center in East Austin, not the glossy venue Sienna was used to. Local women lined up to sample inclusive products, foundation shades that actually matched their skin, lotions without ingredients they couldn't pronounce, prices that didn't require choosing between beauty and groceries. Press photographers captured genuine smiles instead of staged glamour. Nurses from St. David's clinics talked about how the partnership would fund health screenings alongside beauty consultations. Community organizers explained the jobs being created with fair wages and actual benefits. Nolan stood at the front with Arya beside him, their shoulders touching in a way that made it clear they were more than business partners now. Sienna stood 3 feet away, hands clasped, no longer the center of attention, but part of something bigger than herself. This foundation exists because people spoke up when it was dangerous to do so, Nolan said to the crowd. Because workers refused to stay silent. Because someone finally decided that how you treat people matters more than how much money you make. Arya spoke next. And because even people who've done harm can help prevent future harm, if they're willing to own what they did and work under rules that have real teeth. Sienna's turn. The cameras focused on her, waiting for the performance. But she didn't perform. She just told the truth. I built a culture of fear. I made people small so I could feel big. And now I'm here to make sure no one else repeats my mistakes. Her voice was steady. If you see me cutting corners or treating staff badly, you have my permission to call out publicly. That's my contract. That's the deal I'm made to be here. Do you think people can truly change when the rules finally have teeth? After the speeches, after the press left, and the community members took their samples home, Nolan and Arya slipped into an empty office. Adrenaline still ran high between them. He traced a line along her jaw with his thumb, and she leaned into him, their laughter low and private now that the cameras were gone. We did it, she said. We started it, he corrected. This is the easy part. Making it last is where it gets hard. But for now, in this moment, they let themselves feel the win. A young woman appeared in the doorway. Mid-20s, nervous energy, the kind of face Arya recognized from her Arista days, but couldn't quite place. Miss Collins. The woman's voice was soft. I'm Rachel. I used to work in your department. Before everything. Arya straightened. I remember you. I have a story you need to hear before you call this a happy ending. The room went cold. Rachel revealed that even in this new era, smaller players were already trying to copy Arista's old shortcuts under Nolan's name. There's a supplier, she said, pulling out her phone to show screenshots. They're marketing themselves as Reyes Standard approved, even though you've never worked with them. They're using your reputation to cover up the same labor violations Arista got caught for. Nolan's jaw went tight. Arya moved closer to look at the evidence. Photos of products with knockoff branding, ads claiming partnership with the foundation, worker complaints buried in fine print. How long has this been happening? Nolan asked. At least 3 months. Maybe longer. Rachel's hands shook. I tried to report it through normal channels, but nobody wanted to touch it. They said going after companies using your name would look like you were just protecting your brand. Sienna spoke from the doorway. But if you don't go after them, they'll keep doing it. And eventually, your name becomes meaningless. The three of them stood there, Nolan, Arya, and Sienna, realizing that culture was a constant battle, not a press event. That starting something ethical didn't mean it stayed ethical without constant vigilance. We create a public index, Arya said suddenly. A respect index that lists every company we've vetted and approved. And more importantly, lists every company that's been cut from our network for mistreating workers. Name and shame, Sienna said. Make the consequences visible. Make respect cost something, Nolan added. If you abuse workers, you lose access to partnerships, distribution, credibility. Everything. They worked through the night. By morning, the Respect Index was live, a public database that tracked labor practices, listed verified partners, and exposed companies that claimed ethical standards they didn't actually follow. The first company cut from their network was a supplier using Nolan's name. The announcement went out with full documentation of labor violations and false advertising. Backlash came fast. Industry groups called it overreach. Competitors said Nolan was using ethics as a weapon. Some former allies distanced themselves, afraid of ending up on the wrong side of the index. But workers started using it. Community organizers started using it. Activists started using it. Within a month, 3 companies had changed their labor practices just to get off the negative list. 2 more had applied for vetting to join the approved partners. The montage played out across 6 months, clinics carrying their line in underserved neighborhoods. Staff meetings where policies were read aloud and workers confirmed they understood their rights. Arya and Nolan on a modest stage announcing companies being cut from their network for mistreating employees. Sienna standing beside them. Not as an equal, but as proof that accountability could look like second chances with permanent oversight. That night, back at Lake Travis, Nolan and Arya lay on the deck under the dark Texas sky. His fingers were intertwined with hers, and he brought her knuckles to his lips, brushing a kiss there while they talked about the families they were born into and the one they were choosing to build. We're not done, Arya said quietly. This work doesn't end. I know. New companies will try the same old tricks. We'll have to fight this battle every day. I know. Nolan turned to look at her, their faces close in the darkness. But we'll fight it together. And every time someone tells us it's too hard or costs too much or isn't worth it, we'll remember what it felt like to be on the other side. Arya's free hand came up to his face, tracing the line of his jaw. You're not the man they drenched in red anymore. And you're not the girl holding someone else's press folders. They were 2 people who had finally learned that real wealth wasn't money or power or influence. Real wealth was the way you left people feeling once you walked out of the room. It was the culture you built when no one was watching. It was choosing respect even when it cost you everything. He wasn't the man they drenched in red anymore. And she wasn't the girl holding someone else's press folders. They were 2 people who had finally learned that real wealth is the way you leave people feeling once you walk out of the room. If this story made you think about how you treat people who serve you, hit like, subscribe for more stories based on real-life lessons, and tell me in the comments, are you second chance or respect has a cost?